Every name on tonight's list comes with a receipt. Not a guess, not a probability, not a region on a map, an actual document, a plantation ledger, a runaway advertisement, a compensation claim filed with the British government, with your surname sitting inside it, written by someone who never imagined it would ever be read back to the person it was about. One of these names belonged to a man who watched his own mother and grandmother get whipped as a child, escaped to sea at 16, and grew up to write one of the most important first-hand accounts of slavery ever published in London. Another belonged to one of the most famous and most controversial historians of the entire Caribbean, a man whose own writing is still cited today by scholars trying to understand exactly what he was part of. A third is the name of an actual plantation, run by 3 generations of the same family, that still shows up on old maps. 15 surnames tonight. Every single one traced back to a real document, a real date, a real place. This is the deepest this channel has gone into the paper trail yet. Here's what makes tonight different from almost every other video on this channel. Instead of working from the 1817 registers alone, we cross-referenced them against 3 additional sources: the Legacies of British Slave Ownership Database at University College London, which holds the compensation records paid out after abolition in 1833. Original Jamaica almanacs from the 1820s, which listed slave owners parish by parish, estate by estate, and runaway slave advertisements printed in Jamaican newspapers throughout the 1700s and 1800s. When a name shows up across 2 or 3 of these sources independently, that's not speculation anymore. That's confirmation. Tonight, 15 surnames that passed that test. Drop your surname and your parish below. If tonight's list doesn't include your name, tell us anyway. This comment section has become the single best research tool this channel has, and it's how we build every list that comes after this one. Subscribe if this is new to you. New records, new surnames, every week. Quick note before we start counting down. The pinned comment has our Jamaican Surnames ebook, 100 authentic surnames researched in the same depth as everything in this video. Check the pinned comment for the full list before you buy anything. And if it's ever helped, picking it up keeps this research going. 15 names, everyone with a document behind it. Let's go. Number 15, Davis. The Jamaica Almanac of 1827 lists 2 separate Davis slave owners in St. Catherine and St. John Parish alone. Anthony Davis, recorded with 16 enslaved people, and Eleanor W. Davis, recorded with 11. Separately, an 18th century runaway notice references an Edward Davis, tied to a different estate entirely. 3 different Davises, 3 different documents, all within the same general region. A common enough surname that it shows up almost everywhere you look in the record, which usually means the same thing it's meant on every common name this channel has covered. There isn't one single story. There are dozens, all folded into the same 6 letters. Number 14, Downer. If your family has been searching for Downey specifically, the documented spelling in the actual Jamaica almanacs is Downer, and there were several of them, all in the same corner of the island. The 1825 Almanac for Portland and St. George records Caroline Downer and her sisters, George P. M. Downer, at an estate called Snow Hill, Nicholas P. Downer at Plisham's Hill, and Robert Downer at a property literally named Downer's Hope. 4 members of the same family, 4 separate entries, all in the same parish, all on paper, at the same time. Number 13, Bennett. Bennett shows up twice in the documented record, in 2 very different registers. In the Jamaica Almanac of 1825, a woman named Dorothy Bennett is listed as the owner of the Montrose property in St. Elizabeth, with 60 enslaved people recorded on her land and 20 more on an associated holding. Separately, a runaway notice from the same general period references a man who had, quote, formerly belonged to Mr. Robert Bennett before being transferred to another owner. Two different Bennetts, two different parishes, both real, both on paper. Number 12. Falconer. In a runaway advertisement from Westmoreland Parish, an enslaved man is recorded as having worked for, quote, Mr. J. Falconer for upward of 6 years before escaping to reunite with his wife at Carawina Estate. Separately, the Jamaica Almanac lists a William Falconer at an estate simply called Rest, with 56 enslaved people recorded there. If your family carries the surname Falconer and traces to the western parishes, this is the specific pair of documents your name is tied to in the surviving record. Number 11. Williamson. The name Williamson appears repeatedly in Jamaican runaway slave advertisements from the early 1800s, tied to Spanish Town in St. Catherine. In one surviving notice, a man is described as belonging to, quote, a Mr. Williamson, a man of color, in Spanish Town, a detail worth sitting with because it's a reminder that not every enslaver in Jamaica was white. Free people of color, some of them formerly enslaved themselves, sometimes went on to enslave others under exactly the same colonial system. Number 10. Scott. John Scott was awarded compensation for 173 enslaved people on the Wanstead estate, but the record goes deeper than that single payout. The 1831 Jamaica Almanac shows Scott also listed against two other properties, York Pen and Green River, with 85 and 26 enslaved people recorded respectively. Historians examining the compensation records believe the final claim was likely a combined filing covering all three properties at once. One man's name, spread across three separate pieces of land. Nearly 300 people in total moving through his ownership on paper. Number 9. Curry. Isaac G. Curry appears as one of three trustees, alongside Jonathan Brundrett and William Pitcairn, who filed and administered multiple compensation claims across Westmoreland Parish in 1835 and 1836 on behalf of a family named Campbell. One of those claims, for a property called Akendown Pen, covered 157 enslaved people, with a compensation award of £2,855. Number 8. Graham. Graham is tied to the exact same set of Westmoreland compensation claims as Curry. The New Hope Estate filing lists Isaac Curry's trustee group acting on behalf of a man named John Graham Campbell, and a separate appeal in the House of Lords Journal from 1832 names a William Graham directly in a dispute over the same Westmoreland properties. Number 7. Edwards. This is the name with the most complicated legacy on tonight's list. Brian Edwards, whose estate at Eltham is recorded in the 1827 Jamaica Almanac for St. Catherine and St. John, wasn't just a planter. He was one of the most widely read historians of the entire Caribbean in his lifetime, author of a sprawling history of the British West Indian colonies that's still cited by researchers today, including many of the historians who study this exact period of Jamaican slavery. He wrote the record other people now use to understand the very system he profited from. If your surname is Edwards, you're carrying the name of a man whose own words are still being read against him 2 centuries later. Number 6. Perkins. Benjamin Marriott. Perkins owned the Hermitage estate in St. Andrew, and the paper trail on this one is unusually precise. In the mid-1820s, 86 enslaved people were purchased for Perkins from the estate of a man named William Robertson. Following Robertson's death, the transaction is recorded in the compensation database down to the exact count: 49 women and 37 men. By 1828, the property, renamed Hermitage Mountain, still carried 87 people on its books, and the eventual compensation claim came to £2,289, 1 shilling, 2 pence. Number 5. Lawrence. The Fairfield estate in St. James Parish was registered to Richard J. Lawrence in the Jamaica Almanac of 1826, and by 1833, ownership had passed to Charles Lawrence, with a recorded 189 enslaved people on the property. When compensation was claimed in 1835, the claim came instead from a Mary Lawrence Stevenson, filing as owner in FE, a reminder that these estates, and the surnames attached to them, moved through marriage, inheritance, and family transfer just as often as they moved through direct ownership. Number 4. Greavves. By 1826, a man named Charles Whitfoot Greavves owned a plantation called The Hope, with 102 enslaved people recorded that year, down from 121 just 3 years earlier, in 1823. The register even notes that 3 of those enslaved people were counted, in the language of the document itself, in right of marriage with Harriet Griffith, meaning ownership of human beings was, quite literally, part of a marriage settlement. Number 3. Vidal. There was an actual plantation named Vidal's Prospect, growing coffee and pimento, and the documented record follows it through 3 generations of the same family. John Vidal, acting as trustee in 1796, John James Vidal as owner the following year, and by 1807, the property had passed out of Vidal hands entirely, into the possession of a Mrs. Mary Hayman. Number 2. Norris. In St. David Parish, there was an estate that carried the Norris name directly. 231 enslaved people were registered there in 1832, and the eventual compensation award came to £4,641. 7 years later, in 1839, a woman named Ellen Blades wrote directly to the Compensation Commission. Her father had died nearly 2 decades earlier, leaving the Norris Head property to his children. But the terms of his will meant the estate could never be sold, and she had never received what she believed she was owed. She described herself, in her own words, as the wife of a Chelsea hospital pensioner, having been, quote, buffeted about in the world and suffering many privations. The Commission's reply survives too. It was too late to claim. Number 1. Wedderburn. Robert Wedderburn was born in Kingston in 1762, the illegitimate son of an enslaved woman named Rosanna and a Scottish plantation owner named James Wedderburn, who by the time of his death owned 8 separate properties across Westmoreland, together worth more than £300,000. Robert's own grandfather, Sir John Wedderburn, had been hanged, drawn, and quartered for treason after backing the losing side of the Jacobite Rising in 1745, which is what sent the family fleeing from Scotland to Jamaica in the first place. Robert was born free on the condition that his pregnant mother be sold away from his father before his birth. He watched his mother and grandmother beaten as a child. At 16, he escaped the only way he could, joining the Royal Navy. He arrived in England at 17 and eventually became a tailor, a radical preacher, and in 1824, the author of The Horrors of Slavery, a first-hand account so direct that it named his own father as the man responsible for the abuse his mother suffered. If your surname is Wedderburn, you're carrying the name of a man who turned his own family's cruelty into one of the most important written records of what slavery actually looked like, from someone who lived inside it. 15 names tonight, and every single one of them traces back to a document that still physically exists. A ledger, an advertisement, a letter, a book that's still in print 200 years later. This is what happens when you stop asking which region of Africa and start asking which piece of paper. The answers get smaller, more specific, and somehow far more real. Drop your surname and parish below. This is how the next list gets built. And if the ebooks ever helped, it's linked in the pinned comment, full list included, so you can check before you buy. Every name tonight was written down by someone who thought they were just doing paperwork. They had no idea they were leaving you a receipt.